Reference. Okay. So regarding carbohydrate, lipid, and protein metabolism, it is interesting to note that the common product once these compounds are catabolized, okay, or broken down is acetyl-CoA. Kaya lang we have to drink this in na may mga varying processes that occur so that acetyl-CoA will be extracted from them. So number one, let's talk about carbohydrates. So usually, ang ginagamit na metabolic fuel under carbohydrates ay glucose. Okay, glucose. And the specific catabolic process na pinagdadaanan ng glucose is what you call as glycolysis. That's why later madidiscuss natin ang specific steps that occur during glycolysis. But for now, take note that the usual product or the major product of glycolysis are two molecules of pyruvate, in which pyruvate will undergo succeeding catabolic pathways para siya ay maging acetyl-CoA. So mamaya madidiscuss natin ano mga specific events yun. And you know the drill here, kapag naging acetyl-CoA na siya, ready nang pumasok sa Krebs cycle, may 10 ATP agad. Okay, may 10 ATP. And since dalawa ang acetyl-CoA na napoproduce sa glycolysis, multiplied by 2. Okay? Pero meron lang mga madadagdag na mga products which you will encounter later. Okay? Everyone, tingin tayo sa PowerPoint. You can see that the substrate needed for glycolysis is glucose. And you learn in Labster na 6-carbon sugar ang glucose, right? 6 carbon. And the product of glycolysis, we have pyruvate. Can you count how many carbons are present in pyruvate? We have 1, we have 2, and we have 3. Meron pa bang iba o wala na? Tatlo, di ba? So we have 3 carbon atoms. So what can you observe? Ang point dito is, through glycolysis, ang 6 carbon naging 3. Question, lumaki o lumiit? Lumiit. So ano ang glycolysis? Catabolism or anabolism? Yes, catabolism siya. Okay, catabolism because we break down the substrate. Very good. Next, what about for lipids? Okay? For lipids, remember, ang major product ng lipids ay major derivatives ng lipids ay fatty acids. Naalala nyo ba yung fatty acids sa Module 2? Di ba na-discuss natin ang fatty acids? Now, when we talk of lipids, ang prerequisite para siya ay mag-undergo ng catabolism is mako-convert muna ang fatty acid into thioesters. Okay, thioesters. So later, I will show you the structure of a thioester. And thioester is being formed. Again, this is being formed because of the addition of coenzyme A. Okay? Because of the addition of coenzyme A, which will be tackled later. Okay? And then after formation of thioester, that is the time that ang lipid or ang fatty acid lalo na ay mag-undergo ng catabolic pathway, and that catabolic pathway is called beta oxidation. Okay, that is beta oxidation. Nabanggit ko ba sa lesson 1 ang beta oxidation? Yes, okay. So mababalikan natin yun dito. And may corresponding ATP calculation tayo madidiscuss. That's why you can see on the given figure, so tingin tayo ulit sa figure, di ba natutunan nyo na ang fatty acid ay isang carboxylic acid na may long chain hydrocarbons, right? So ang first step nga is formation of thioester, okay, thioester because of coenzyme A, okay, because of the addition of coenzyme A. And as you check the structure of thioester, this is basically an ester. However, instead of oxygen, the one being attached is sulfur, okay, sulfur instead of oxygen. So thioester. And then after that, ang thioester will undergo finally beta oxidation. Okay, this will undergo beta oxidation until such time that acetyl-CoA will be produced. For the nth time, kapag may acetyl coenzyme A na, ready na bang pumasok sa citric acid cycle? Yes. Okay, ready na siya. So may pera na naman. Everyone, makikita nyo ang dami na acetyl-CoA na pwede ma-produce. Halimbawa dito, 9. Later, magigets nyo bakit ang dami compared sa carbs. Okay? Nasusundan so far? Okay, nice. Moving on, let's have protein metabolism. Recall, class, that the monomer units of proteins are amino acids, right? And amino acids should be utilized right away. Di ba sabi natin, in general, ang mga amino acids are not stored in the body and they are rapidly catabolized for energy utilization and protein build-up or protein formation. And meron tayo mga specific chemical processes or reactions na pinagdadaanan ng amino acids para siya ay maging energy. Ang tatandaan nyo muna dito, although nasabi ko na ata to before, iba ang nagiging fate ng amino group ng amino acid at iba ang nagiging fate ng ano yung isa? Ano yung isa? Carbon skeleton. Okay? Yung carbon skeleton. Nabanggit ko ba to sa lesson 1 or hindi? Okay. So, iba ang fate ng amino group and also the carbon skeleton. So, we will tackle these fates later. Okay? Itatackle natin siya mamaya. So, yan po ang overview ng carbs, lipid, and also protein metabolism. So, bago tayo mag-proceed sa carbohydrate metabolism, some tips to remember regarding the chemical reactions. Of course, for these metabolic reactions to happen, we need different enzymes. So meron tayo mga certain clues or hints na pwedeng ma-identify kung ano ang nangyayaring chemical reaction. For example, for carboxylase, carboxylase is responsible for the addition of carboxylate functional group, okay, carboxylate. And then, decarboxylase naman, as the term suggests, de means removal. So we are removing carbon dioxide, for instance. And then dehydrogenase naman is responsible for the removal of hydrogen and also introduction of double bonds. And then isomerase naman, isomerase is responsible for isomerization, as we tell. And then finally, siguro familiar na kayo dito, kinase is a transferase, remember? And ang kinase is responsible for the transfer of what group? That is phosphate. Hey, phosphate. So in-expect natin if kinase comes into play, there's phosphorylation. Okay, there is phosphorylation. So the reason kaya to binanggit as clues kasi ilang beses to ma-encounter as we discuss the different pathways. So halimbawa sa figure na ito, actually madali na siyang malaman kasi alam nyo na ang kinase is responsible for the transfer of phosphate group. So it is expected that kapag nagkaroon ng phosphorylation, halimbawa sa fructose 6-phosphate, it will become 1,6-bisphosphate because of transfer of phosphate by the kinase. Question, sino ang magiging source? Sino ang magiging panggagalingan? Sino yung panggagalingan ng phosphate? That is ATP. That's why you can see here na there is removal or what you call hydrolysis of adenosine triphosphate, kaya naging adenosine diphosphate na lang siya. Okay? So, ang point dito is, ang pinanggagalingan ng phosphate group ay yung adenosine triphosphate, which will be added to the substrate. Pag sinabing substrate, the fructose 6-phosphate. Okay? So yan po ang mga tatandaan nating enzymes. Are you still there, everyone? Okay, very good. So I think we can now proceed on the specific chemical reactions. Number 1, we start with carbohydrate metabolism. We discussed that the usual fate of glucose, which is a carbohydrate, is glycolysis. So that's why we are going to discuss now glycolysis. And I bet you already have an idea what glycolysis is kasi sa botany na-discuss nyo ito. Okay? Glycolysis is considered as a linear 10-step anaerobic pathway that converts glucose into, as I've said, 2 molecules of pyruvate. This is an example of a catabolic reaction because we tend to break down glucose into smaller units called pyruvate molecules. Okay? And then, it was mentioned na linear pathway siya. Ibig sabihin, meron siyang starting reaction at meron siyang ending reaction. Kaya linear pathway. This is in contrary to the cyclic pathway citric acid cycle. Naalala niyo ba yung citric acid cycle last meeting? Di ba ang citric acid cycle, the final product in the citric acid cycle will be used again for the first reaction to happen. Okay? And that is very good, oxaloacetate. Pero dito sa glycolysis, yung ending product that is pyruvate will no longer be reutilized para mangyari ang glycolysis. Kaya siya is straight pathway lang. Now, we can divide glycolysis into two major phases. Siguro hindi na ito bago sa inyo. Meron tayong investment phase and generation phase. So the steps 1 to 5 is comprised or are comprised of energy investment phase. Pag sinabi nating investment, usually pa nag-i-invest, anong ibig sabihin yan? Kukuha ka ng pera o gagastos ka ng pera? Pag sinabi, uy, invest ka. O mali kayo. Pag sinabing invest, gagastos. Okay, gagastos. Halimbawa, sabihin mo, hay, nag-invest na ako ng feelings sa kanya. Ano ibig sabihin mo doon na nag-invest ka ng feelings sa kanya? Nagbigay ka ng pagmamahal sa tao. So gumastos ka kasi hindi mo naman nakuha pabalik. Ang point ng investment is gagastos ka kasi may inaasahan ka that one day may babalik sa'yo. Okay, yun ang ibig sabihin ng investment. Kaya whenever you hear the term investment, yes, you give first. Yun ang investment. Na you would expect that in the future, you will get something in return. But sometimes, investment fails, di ba? So minsan nagfe-fail siya. But anyway, so pag sinabi nating energy investment, nakalagay ATP are being hydrolyzed. 2 ATP molecules. Ibig sabihin, gagastos. Kaya gagastos tayo ng 2 ATP molecules. And pag sinabing gagastos, sa kinita mong pera, halimbawa nag-business ka, sa kinita mong pera, ima-minus mo ba ito sa total revenue mo? Yes, isusubtract mo siya. Kaya tandaan nyo, meron tayong isusubtract later. Okay? Kasi ginastos mo siya. And then, for steps 6 to 10 naman, take note, this is energy generating phase. Ibig sabihin, ito na yung mga steps na inaasahan mo na yung ininvest mong ATP babalik sa'yo at syempre, kaya ka nga nag-invest, may tutubuin ka dapat. Ay, may tutubuin. Wherein, sa steps 6 to 10, we can expect that along the way, habang ginagawa ang pyruvate, meron tayo magagawang isang NADH, and then 2 ATP molecules, okay, for each pyruvate form. Okay, for each pyruvate form. So pag sinabi nating for each pyruvate form, that tells us that we have to multiply this by 2. Okay, we have to multiply this by 2. Everyone, do you understand why do we have to multiply? Yes, okay, very good. Kasi kada isang pyruvate na magagawa, along the way, may magagawang isang NADH at 2 ATP. Question, ito ba ay sources of energy? Pwede ba sila maging energy? Yes. Halimbawa sa NADH, check ito na pwede maging pera. Okay? So yan po ang general steps sa glycolysis. Now, this figure summarizes the 2 phases of glycolytic pathway. So una, nabanggit natin from steps 1 to 5, that is the energy investment phase. Hindi pinakita sa slide na to ang 5th step. Later, I will show you. So we have step 1, 2, 3, 4, and then later 5. And you can see, guys, na investment siya because may mga reactions that we need ATP as money, okay, or as energy. So meron tayong 2 gagastusing ATP na na-hydrolyze becoming ATP. So that's energy investment phase. And then time will come that you will harvest your investment. So sa sa generation phase naman, that means from step 6 hanggang 10, step 6 hanggang 10, we tend to make new sources of energy in the form of NADH, which is a cheque that can be converted eventually to ATP. And then, meron pa tayong 2 ATP molecules na nagagawa. Question, kada isa or both pyruvates? Etong sinabi natin na isa, and then 2 ATP. Ito ba ay kada isang pyruvate lang? Yes. Kaya nakalagay dyan, each pyruvate. Okay? Each pyruvate. So yan po ang tatandaan natin. Okay? So, yan po ang general steps in glycolysis. So now, i-discuss natin isa-isa. First stop, we have the energy investment phase. So on step 1, since ang ating raw material is glucose, the first step that would happen is phosphorylation of glucose. Anong sabi natin everyone pag phosphorylation? Our expectation is addition of phosphate. And the source of phosphate is from adenosine triphosphate. Okay? So the phosphate group, listen, the phosphate group from adenosine triphosphate will be transferred by hexokinase. It will be transferred by hexokinase at idadagdag siya, everyone, sa 6-carbon atom ng glucose. Okay? Sa ika-6 na carbon ng glucose. That's why, ang product natin sa first step is glucose 6-phosphate. Okay? The product form is glucose 6-phosphate. So sa step 1, nag-invest ba tayo ng ATP? Yes, okay. Meron tayong isang in-invest na ATP sa step 1. Next, step 2. Ang step 2 naman, it involves isomerization or rearrangement of glucose 6-phosphate into fructose 6-phosphate. Take note, everyone, that glucose and fructose are isomers, okay? And through rearrangement, pwede natin ma-convert ang glucose 6-phosphate into fructose 6-phosphate. And in this case, ang responsible enzyme is the phosphohexose isomerase, okay? So that is the enzyme responsible. Next, take note sa step 2, no expenditure of ATP. Okay, walang ginastos na ATP. Moving on, nasusundan, everyone. Okay, nice. Moving on, we have step 3. As you can see, ang clue nyo dito, pag nakakita kayo ng phosphorylation of the substrate, ay kapag may phosphorylation of the substrate, gagastos ng ATP. Okay? Kasi, dadagdagan mo ng phosphate group yung substrate eh. So you need ATP as a source. And since phosphorylation occurs also at the third step, we need kinase enzyme ulit. Okay, kinase enzyme. That's why, on the third step, meron na naman tayong na-expend na ATP. Okay, may nagastos na naman tayong ATP na isa. So that is via phosphofructokinase. And the intermediate product formed is called fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Fructose 1,6-bisphosphate has 2 phosphate groups apparently that are found first sa unang carbon and then yung isa sa huling carbon. Okay? So 1 at saka 6, kaya yung kanyang pangalan. So these are the first 3 steps. So recap tayo sa first three steps. Meron na tayong na-expand na ATP. We have 2 ATP molecules. So overall, the first 3 steps of glycolysis add phosphate groups and isomerized glucose into fructose. And there are 2 ATP molecules na na-utilize para ma-modify natin ang glucose that would be ready for the succeeding reactions. So next, pwede na tayo sa step 4. Alright, so step 4 naman, step 4 facilitates cleavage of fructose 1,6-bisphosphate via the enzyme aldolase. Remember, ito yung hint nyo, everyone. Remember that we are talking here about fructose. Fructose is a 6-carbon sugar. Okay, this is a 6-carbon sugar. And since there is cleavage here, that means to say that the 6-carbon fructose 1,6-bisphosphate will be cleaved off by half, kalahati. Ibig sabihin, yung isang product niya ay may 3 carbon at yung isang product, ilang carbon present? 3 din. Okay, 3. Tig-3. That's why, through cleavage, nagigets ba yung sinasabi ko? Okay, nagigets? So through cleavage of fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, the products dihydroxyacetone and glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, they have 3 carbon atoms both. Okay, they have 3 carbon atoms. So let's check. Number 1, for dihydroxyacetone, there are apparently 3 carbons present. And for glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, there are also 3 carbons present. So it matches the substrate fructose, okay, or fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. So yan po ang dalawang products. So try nating i-recall, kung i-check nyo ang dihydroxyacetone and glyceraldehyde, they only have 3 carbon atoms. So you tend to connect this with pyruvate. Di ba mamaya, or kanina rather, ang pyruvate, ilang carbons meron ang pyruvate? 3 din. Okay? Kaya dyan na nanggagaling yon. So next step, so sa step 5 actually, there is only isomerization of one of the 3 carbon products, and that is dihydroxyacetone. Ang dihydroxyacetone will undergo isomerization, molecular rearrangement. That is, ang DHP ay magiging glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Ay magiging glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate na siya. So question everyone, after step 5, at the end of step 5, how many glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate do we have already? Okay, so tandaan, meron na tayong dalawang molecules ng glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. And mind you, again, makinig ha, mind you, kada isang piraso ng glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate ay mag-undergo ng generating phase bago maging pyruvate. Kaya nga, ang mangyayari is mata times 2 ang mga products. Okay, mata times 2 ang mga products. Kasi kada isang piraso ng glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate mag-undergo ng step 6, 7, 8, 9, and then final step wherein may generation of energy, ultimately pyruvate is formed. Ganun din sa isa pang glyceraldehyde. Naintindihan bakit dapat i-multiply sa dalawa? Naintindihan? Okay, what about the others? Okay, good. So natapos na natin ang steps 1 to 5. O mga bata, recap tayo. Okay, recap tayo. Recap natin ang first 5 steps, energy investment. How many ATP ang nagastos? Very good, 2. Ano mga chemical reactions ang nakita nung nag-expend, or ano yung chemical reaction ang nangyari nung nag-expend tayo ng ATP? Phosphorylation ang sagot. Okay, phosphorylation. Very good. Phosphorylation. And then, you can see also na may isomerization na nangyari. Okay, next. Siyempre, bilang na bilang sa daliri ang mga martir na tao. Bilang na bilang sa daliri ang hindi humingi ng kapalit, di ba? So kung tayo ay gumastos ng ATP, panahon na ng pagbangon, babawiin natin to. And syempre, kailangan may tubo. Kaya papasok tayo sa energy generation phase. In step number 6 facilitates oxidation of this molecule, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, forming 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. So sabi natin, it facilitates oxidation reaction. Okay? It facilitates oxidation reaction. Question, kapag may oxidation, do we need an oxidizing agent? Yes, ay kailangan natin na oxidizing agent. So in this regard, ano po ang naging oxidizing agent natin? Ano ang naging oxidizing agent natin? NAD, very good. So, this served as the oxidizing agent. O anong sabi ko sa electron transport chain? Ang daming redox sa EPC, di ba? Anong nagiging fate ng NAD pagkatapos niya maging oxidizing agent? Was it oxidized or was it reduced? Alright, very good. So, it was reduced. Kaya you expect na kapag na-reduce ang NAD, nadadagdagan o nababawasan ng hydrogen? Nadadagdagan. Kaya meron siyang NADH. So sa step 6, ang important dito, again, ang important dito is we have NADH. Okay? So NADH generation na isang reducing equivalent na pwedeng mapa-encash sa electron transport chain. Okay? Sa electron transport chain. So that is step number 6. Next, sa step number 7 naman, the phosphate group is being transferred into ADP. So in this case, may phosphorylation din mangyayari. However, it's from 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate papuntang ADP. Okay? Papuntang ADP. And that is made possible by the enzyme phosphoglycerate kinase. So in this case, ang phosphorylation ay direct directed towards adenosine diphosphate. Kaya sa step 7, meron tayong na-generate na isang ATP. Okay? Sa step 7, meron tayong na-generate na isang ATP na energy ulit. Okay, energy ulit. So that is step 7. So that's why the product after step 7, you can see na nabawasan na siya ng isang phosphate group. So it became 3-phosphoglycerate. Okay? O recap tayo ng step 6 and 7. Ang magigain natin sa step 6, we have NADH. Sa step 7 naman, isang ATP. Next, sa step 8, isomerization lang ang mangyayari. That is from 3-phosphoglycerate via mutase enzyme, it becomes 2-phosphoglycerate wherein the phosphate group has been rearranged. Makikita na siya sa second carbon. Okay, sa second carbon. Pero wala naman tayo magigain na energy equivalent sa mismong step number 8. Next, step 9. Step 9 is dehydration wherein water is being removed. Okay? Water is being removed from 2-phosphoglycerate forming phosphoenol pyruvate. And then for the last step, again for the last step, there is phosphate transfer again to ADP. Okay? Ang phosphate group from phosphoenol pyruvate will be transferred to ADP. Kaya nagiging ATP siya. Kaya nagiging ATP. Kaya ang ultimate product natin after step number 10 is pyruvate. Okay? Pyruvate ang nakikreate. So note everyone that at step number 10, okay, step number 10, meron tayong nagawang energy ulit na isang ATP. Okay, na isang ATP. So yan ang 6 to 10th step. Ulitin natin, from step 6 hanggang step 10, meron tayong kada isang glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, meron tayong nakikreate na isang NADH. Tama ba ko? Isang NADH at ilang ATP kada isang glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Dalawa, okay? Dalawang ATP. So ang point dito is along the way, habang ginagawa ang pyruvate. Pero pyruvate itself can create its own energy. It can have its own energy equivalent na madidiscuss natin mamaya, okay? So, we have isang NADH at dalawang ATP. Question, do we need to multiply this by 2? Okay, so we will multiply this by 2, kaya madodoble ito. Kasi meron tayong dalawang substrates na glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. So, in summary, okay, the 2 glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate units are converted into 2 pyruvate units in phase 2 of glycolysis. At tandaan, along the way, pag sinasabi kong along the way, habang ginagawa ang pyruvate, may racket tayo. Ibig sabihin ng racket, may extrang paraan para magka-energy. That is, nakakagawa tayo ng dalawang NADH2 for both pathways, dalawa na kasi, and then 4 ATPs, kasi dalawa yung glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Okay? Next. Nagets ba to? Nagets? Okay, continue natin. So what are the net results of glycolysis? Remember, meron tayong dalawang phases ng glycolysis. Yung una, gumastos ka ng dalawang ATP. Natatandaan, gumastos ka ng dalawang ATP. And then sa energy generation phase, for both pathways, for both glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, meron kang dalawang NADH, meron kang 4 na ATP. Tama ba ko? And then, ilang pyruvate? Okay, dalawang pyruvate. Okay, so yan ang mga products. So there are 2 ATPs used. Pag sinabing used, nagastos, kaya ima-minus mo siya later on kapag nag-compute tayo ng ATP. And then 4 ATP molecules are made in the second phase, that is energy generation. So the net result is the synthesis of 2 ATPs from glycolysis. So pag sinabi nating net result, pag minus na dito, ang nagastos. Okay? Pag minus na dito ang nagastos. So since meron tayong 4, okay, may 4 tayong gross ATP, ulitin ko ha, since meron tayong 4 na gross ATP, pag minus mo dito ang investment mo na dalawa, dalawa na lang ang net. Okay? Dalawa na lang ang net ATP. Nagets niyo ba? Okay, so pag sinabing gross, hindi pa na minus ang kinapital mo o ininvest mo. Pero pag net na minus na. And then, what did I tell you before? Kapag naman nagawa na ang NADH, so pag na-produce na ang NADH, ito ay isang cheque. Okay? Check siya na dadali natin sa bangko. Ang bangko natin ay ang mitochondria. Okay? Ano ba ang ginagawa ng mitochondria pag nakarating ang NADH doon? Ang NADH ay ginagamit for electron transport chain. Ginagamit siya for electron transport chain. Very good. At pag na-encash siya through oxidative phosphorylation or pag nagawa siya through oxidative phosphorylation, that causes synthesis of 2.5 ATPs per NADH. Okay? 2.5 ATPs per NADH. Tama ba ako? 2.5 ang NAD? H? Okay. Kada piraso. So at least may idea na kayo sa computation mamaya kasi may mga factors tayong ginagamit. Mamaya magko-compute tayo, don't worry, para ma-practice. Can we proceed on the next? Pwede na? Hindi ko sure kung nag-lag ako or hindi lang kayo nasagot. Tuloy na tayo. Sige. Next, summary ito ng resulta ng glycolysis. Remember that the substrate of glycolysis is glucose. Okay, glucose. And ang isang important ingredient na kailangan din natin ay ang oxidizing agent na NAD. Question, ilang NAD na oxidizing agent ang kailangan? Isa o dalawa? Ilan ang NAD na kailangan? Dalawa. Bakit dalawa? Kasi dalawa ang glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Okay, dalawa. So sa step 6, if I'm not mistaken, sa step 6, kada isang glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate ay mau-oxidize. Okay, kaya dalawa ang kailangan natin. Okay? And then the ultimate products are, number 1, we have pyruvate, 2 molecules of pyruvate. And then aside from that, we have 2 reduced equivalents na i-encash natin sa electron transport chain, and also along the way, meron din tayo na generate na net. Okay, pag sinabing net, nabawas na yung nagastos. Okay, meron tayong dalawang net ATPs. Naintindihan overall? Okay, so yan po ang glycolysis. So everyone, I'll just focus on glucose as the substrate. So yung mga PowerPoint slides ng fructose, ng galactose, mannose, don't study them anymore. Okay, don't study them anymore. So I'll just focus on glucose. So laktawan na natin siya. Dito tayo ngayon sa fate ng pyruvate. Are we good? Okay, so proceed tayo everyone sa pyruvate. Take note everyone that pyruvate as the final product of glycolysis may undergo 3 possible fates. Okay, 3 possible fates and depende ito sa organism. Although na-discuss ko na yung iba dito sa introduction na metabolism, tama ba? So una, ang pyruvate pwede siya maging acetyl coenzyme A, kapag oxygen-rich or oxygen-poor. Okay, pag mataas ang oxygen saturation sa ating katawan. Very good. And then kapag mababa naman ang saturation ng oxygen sa ating katawan or anaerobic, ang pyruvate pwede siya maging lactic acid or lactate. Kaya nga ang tawag natin usually, pag ang pyruvate ay nagiging acetyl-CoA ay aerobic respiration. Kaya ang tawag natin doon ay aerobic respiration. So, aerobic respiration. And apparently, kapag absent or deficit ang oxygen, it's anaerobic. Okay? Anaerobic respiration. And finally, pwede rin siya maging ethanol. Okay, pwede rin siya maging ethanol, pero tandaan natin, hindi tayo mikrobyo. Okay, kaya hindi ito sa atin nangyayari. Okay, yung nagiging ethanol siya. E di, kung kaya natin gumawa ng ethanol, wala nang nom-nom, di ba? May ethanol na agad. So, hindi natin kaya yan. Microorganisms lang yan. So, ang tawag naman doon ay sa micro, nag-micro na ba kayo? Hindi pa, di ba? Fermentation. Okay, so ang tawag doon ay fermentation. So yan po ang i-discuss natin isa-isa. So starting off with aerobic respiration. So ang aerobic or during aerobic condition where oxygen is rich, pyruvate is being oxidized, forming acetyl coenzyme A. And then pag naging acetyl coenzyme A na siya, automatic na yon na kada isang pyruvate, tandaan na, kada isang pyruvate, nagiging isang acetyl-CoA, nagiging isang acetyl-CoA, at sa bawat isang acetyl-CoA, pag pumasok ito sa ETC hanggang mag-undergo ng electron transport chain, 10 ang magagawang ATP. Tama ba ako, 10? Ha? Okay, very good. So isang pyruvate ay nagiging isang acetyl-CoA, and then eventually mag-undergo nung pathway sa diniscuss natin last meeting, kaya may 10 ATP. Pero makinig, tingin sa figure, wala mo na magsusulat, tingin sa figure, may racket pa rin na pwede mangyari. O para hindi kayo malito, pag sinasabi kong racket, extra income para magkaroon ng extra pera or energy. Okay? So mapapansin natin, pag na-oxidize ang pyruvate into acetyl-CoA, we need an oxidizing agent. We need an oxidizing agent. And that is NAD. Okay? NAD. So kailangan din ng isang NAD pala kapag ang pyruvate ay magiging acetyl-CoA. Kailangan natin ng isang NAD. That is oxidizing agent. And as you know, kapag meron tayong oxidizing agent, ang fate ng NAD ay nagiging NADH. Ang NADH ba ay pagkakataon nating magkapera? Yes. So meron na naman siyang equivalent money or energy na ipapa-encash natin sa bangko. Okay? Kaya may pera na naman ditong kikitain. Kaya pag nag-review kayo, ganito ang magiging style ng pag-aaral nyo. Pag nag-start kayo sa carbohydrates, di ba glucose? Sabi ni Sir, ang glucose nagiging pyruvate through glycolysis. Pag maraming oxygen, nagiging acetyl-CoA. Okay? Nagigets ba ako? So, pyruvate nagiging acetyl-CoA. O, i-reflect nyo. Habang nagaganap ang reactions from glucose to pyruvate, may mga racket. Pag sinabing racket, merong ini-invest mo ng 2 ATP at merong kukuning ATP na 4 na gross tapos 2 NADH kada total pyruvate. Okay? And then, ang pyruvate naman, para siya ay maging acetyl-CoA, may racket na naman dito. And it's for you to figure out ano yung racket na sinasabi ko dyan. So it has something to do with the one I mentioned earlier. Okay? So ang inyong analogy dito ay racket. So habang nag-undergo ang chemical reactions, may extra income. Aside sa final product. Did you get my point? Nakuha nyo? Okay. Mga side products, kumbaga. So done with aerobic condition. Paano naman pag anaerobic? When oxygen is lacking. So kapag oxygen is lacking, of course, wala tayong mapoproduce na acetyl-CoA. Instead, it is lactate or lactic acid. And note class na in this regard, ang tendency, meron tayong abundance ng NADH. Okay? Abundance ng NADH. So, ibig sabihin, wala tayong oxidizing agent here. Okay? Wala tayong oxidizing agent. That is, NADH ang meron instead of NAD. So, ano ang mga possible implications kapag nag-accumulate ang lactate sa katawan ng tao? Actually, ito yung naririnig nyo, halimbawa, namumulikat. Okay, namumulikat for example. So during strenuous exercise, when ATP needs are high, halimbawa tumatakbo ka, nagsiswimming ka, of course, you need so much oxygen especially those muscles that are stressed, pero may mga pagkakataon na hindi makapag-compensate ang katawan. So in that regard, ang tendency, instead of makapag-synthesize ng ATP, kulang ng oxygen, kaya lactate ang nag-accumulate. And accumulation of lactate in muscles can cause soreness and also cramping. Ayan, also cramping. Namumulikat ka. So pwede mo sabihin sa friend mo na namumulikat, bago mo siya parelaxin, ang dami mo lactate. Pwede mo sabihin ganon. Bago mo siya gamutin. Para magamot mo yung taong nagka-cramps, ano mo lang, relax lang, hinga malalim, o gets nyo na yung rationale doon somehow kasi pag naghinga sila ng malalim, may introduction of oxygen, on action si hemoglobin, pupunta siya sa area kung saan kailangan, may oxygen supply na, so therefore, magkakaroon ng proper conversion ang pyruvate into acetyl-CoA na kasi marami ng oxygen. Okay? Yun yung rationale behind it. Ayun yung rationale behind it. Kaya 'di ba, naalala niyo yung lobster na game o pindot lang kayo ng pindot? Doon sa lobster game, may nasabi doon, 'di ba, na kailangan ng high caloric intake bago sumali sa mga marathon. Okay? Kailangan ng high caloric intake kasi meron kang stores ng carbohydrate na immediate source of energy na ready para mag-undergo ng glycolysis if ever, and then acetyl-CoA. So may energy ka na ulit. So kumbaga, pag nagpapapawis ka, nag-exercise ka, masarap yung feeling na naiintindihan mo yung nangyayari sa katawan, ba't ka may energy, ba't ka walang energy, kasi may nagagrasp ka dito sa discussion natin. Okay? So an oxygen debt is created, and when the vigorous activity decreases, the person must take deep breaths of air to repay this debt. O yun nga, hihinga lang na malalim para may enough concentration na ng oxygen. Okay? So yun na rin yung sinabi natin. Ano pa yung relevance dito? Ang muscle ay hindi na nakakoncentrate sa ating skeletal muscles, the ones that we contract usually during exercise. No, you learned also that the heart is a muscle, right? It is a cardiac muscle in fact. So kapag meron tayong absence of oxygenation sa parte ng puso natin, instead of energy creation, lactate formation na mangyayari, kaya ang heart ay nagsusore o kaya nagka-cramping din ang heart. So ibig sabihin, related yon sa mga cardiac conditions, heart attack, chest pain. Okay? Related yon. Kaya isa sa mga minemeasure na enzyme usually kapag meron kang potential cardiac problem is lactate enzyme or yung mga lactic-related enzymes. Okay? So related siya dito. So ito na rin yun. Pwedeng i-measure ang lactate level ng isang tao. Pag mataas, pwede siyang i-correlate doon sa potential cardiac problem and other cardiopulmonary conditions. So that's it. Proceed tayo, everyone. Okay. O recap muna tayo. Na-discuss na natin yung fate ng pyruvate, yung dalawang fates. Una, oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor. Paano naman ang mga microorganisms? Ang microorganisms, they can also, they have the ability also to convert further pyruvate, but in this regard, alcohol ang nakikreate nila. And that is the process called fermentation. Okay? That is the process called fermentation. So fermentation is an anaerobic conversion of glucose to ethanol and also carbon dioxide held by yeast and also microorganisms. So this happens because of the enzymes pyruvate decarboxylase removing carbon dioxide, and then further oxidation by alcohol dehydrogenase, and that is makakapag-produce tayo finally ng ethanol. And in fact, if you are familiar, fermentation is the principle na kinoconduct or ina-apply ng mga manufacturers of different alcoholic beverages. So the ethanol in alcoholic beverages is obtained by fermentation of the sugars in grapes and other related sources. Yes, sa winemaking. Unfortunately, hindi kayo nakapag winemaking kayo sa bahay, hindi kayo pinag-winemaking, pero na-discuss ni Sir Patrick to. Yes, okay. So sa winemaking, applicable tong fermentation. So yun nga, microorganisms ang may kaya makapag-produce niyan. Nung college ako, ang winemaking namin sa pharmacognosy. Actually, magka-group kami ni Sir Patrick noon. Magka-grupo kami noon sa winemaking. Ayan, gumawa pa nga kami ng commercial dati. So kung sakali nag-face-to-face tayo sa biochem, malamang pagagawin niya rin kayo ng mga ganyan. Hindi ko alam kung something good or bad yon sa inyo na walang mga ganyang mga activities. But anyway, so yan po ang mga fates ng pyruvate. Okay, so since we were able to finish discussing the usual fate of pyruvate, i-discuss natin in totality ang ATP yield sa bawat isang glucose, sa bawat isang pirasong glucose. So let's say, i-review natin to ha. Let's say, ang isang molecule ng glucose ay nag-undergo ng glycolytic pathway. So first things first, ang glucose through glycolysis nakakagawa ng dalawang pyruvates. Okay? Nakakagawa siya ng dalawang pyruvates. And then after that, nakakagawa ng dalawang acetyl-CoA provided na oxygen-rich. Okay? Provided na oxygen-rich. Kasi kada isang pyruvate, ulitin ko ha, kada isang pyruvate, isang acetyl-CoA. Question, rigid ba sa ganitong processes ang energy generation o may racket? May racket ba? Yes, okay, may racket na napoproduce. Kaya makikita natin na through glycolysis of glucose, number one, meron tayong dalawang ATP na na-generate. Question, ano yung dalawang ATP na to? Gross or net? Net, very good. Nabawas na ang na-invest. Okay, nabawas na yung na-invest. That's right. And then, meron tayong along the way, may isa pang racket habang ginagawa ang dalawang pyruvate. Meron tayong magagawang dalawang NADH. Question, yung dalawang NADH ba na to ay applicable na sa dalawang glyceraldehyde phosphates? Applicable na ba sila sa dalawang glyceraldehyde 3-phosphates? Yes. Di ba ang pinanggalingan nila ay glyceraldehyde 3-phosphates? Question, gets nyo bakit 5 ATP ang nakalagay dito? Yes, kasi 2.5 per NADH. Okay, 2.5 per NADH. Very good. Next, pag nabuo ang pyruvate, nasusundan pa ba ako? Ha? Okay, pag nabuo ang pyruvate, ang next step ay magiging acetyl coenzyme A siya. Kaya lang, hindi siya basta-basta nako-convert ng ganito na walang racket. Meron pa ring racket, di ba? So that is, meron tayong kinitang racket na dalawang NADH. Question, bakit dalawa? Ano ang ratio natin? Kada isang pyruvate, isang NADH. Okay, balikan ko to ha. Kada isang pyruvate, isang NADH. Ayan, naalala nyo to? Okay, isang pyruvate, isang NADH ang kinikita. Okay, isang NADH ang kinikita. So that's why may dalawa in totality sa step from pyruvate to acetyl-CoA. And then finally, yung dalawang acetyl-CoA papasok sa citric acid cycle, sa electron transport chain, and oxidative phosphorylation. O ganito kasimple. Kada isang acetyl-CoA, ano ang equivalent ATP? 10. Okay, 10. Ilang acetyl-CoA ang na-produce sa dalawang pyruvate? 2. Kaya ang total, ilan? 20. Kaya ang total 20. Question, 20 ba to lahat? Yung naka-bracket natin na blue, 20 ba yan? Yes, total nito 20. So naka-breakdown lang siya. So para masundan ng lahat, bakit naging 20 ito? So una, bakit dalawa ang GTP? Times 2 lang yon. Okay, times 2. Bakit 6 ang NADH? Kasi 3 times 2. Nagets ba ako? Nagigets? And then, 1 times 2, kaya 2. That's why we have 20 ATP. So altogether, pag inad natin ito, ang ATP yield kada isang glucose, let's add 2 plus 5 plus 5 plus 20, ang total ay 32 ATPs. Okay, 32. So ang total ATP yield sa kada isang glucose, 32 ATPs. Okay, 32. Question, is this gross or net? Net. Okay, net. 34 pag gross. Okay? Gets na bakit 34 ang gross? Okay, kasi gumastos nga tayo. Okay? Everyone, okay, very good. Everyone, ito yung sinasabi kong ATP calculation na nasusundan nyo pag gumawa kayo ng activity. Okay? Doon kasi sa na-upload sa Canvas, iba yung conversion na nailagay doon. Ito na lang ang sundin for uniformity. So wala na magtatanong sa akin sa ATP conversions about NADH and FADH2. Ang gamitin nyo, 2.5 tsaka 1.5. And then, okay na yon. Feeling ko hindi pa kayo nag-start. Hindi ko pa kasi nagdo-double check yung mga activities nyo eh. So siguro yung iba hindi pa na-start ang conversion. Anyway, naintindihan na po? Naintindihan? Okay. Guys, yung mga succeeding slides, naka-breakdown lang dito yung sinabi ko, pero ito na yung lahat. So halimbawa, actually paulit-ulit na lang siya. Ito yung general conversion natin or general reaction involved sa glucose. And then, we have 5 ATP nga because we have 2 NADH. Not to mention na meron tayong dalawang net ATP. And then after that, yung dalawang pyruvates will be oxidized to become acetyl-CoA. But I told you na kada isang pyruvate na na-oxidize into acetyl-CoA, may isang NADH. Kaya kung dalawa ang pyruvates natin, dalawang NADH ang nakikreate na reduced equivalents. And then finally, pasok sa citric acid cycle, pasok sa electron transport chain, and then oxidative phosphorylation. In totality, we have 20 ATPs here. Kaya ang total net ay 32 ATPs. Okay? So halimbawa, meron kayong task or merong question na ilang ATP ang nakikreate sa 10 molecules of glucose, i-multiply nyo lang sa 10 ang 32. Okay? Ang magpapahirap lang dito sa computation, pag tinanong yung specific products, halimbawa, ilang NADH ang nagawa, kung 10 ang glucose, etc. etc. So yun yung medyo mamasterin natin. Okay? Eto guys, na-discuss ko na to sa lesson 1, yung hormones, insulin, and also glucagon. Actually, malalim pa nga yung discussion natin dun sa lesson 1. So ito, medyo madali na lang sa inyo. So for example, when blood glucose levels rise after meal, pag sinabing rise after meal, we are busog. Okay, busog. So ang goal is itago yon. Okay, itago. Kaya insulin comes into play. Kaya usually ang insulin ay anabolic siya. Anabolic. Kasi yung sobra, itatago niya. And syempre, para masustain ang life natin, lalo na pag gutom tayo, meron tayong glucagon. Glucagon that would cause an increase in blood glucose level. And usually, ang effect ng glucagon ay catabolic or anabolic. Ano ang effect ng glucagon? Yes, that is catabolic. Catabolic siya. Kasi gagawin niya ang lahat, makapag-extract lang ng glucose. Okay? Makapag-extract lang ng glucose. So isa doon na ginagawa ng glucagon ay gluconeogenesis. Na-discuss ko na rin ito, di ba, sa lesson 1? Okay? So pakibalikan nyo na lang, everyone, ang gluconeogenesis. And we have different substrates for gluconeogenesis. So some of them are lactate, amino acids, and glycerol. I told you those amino acids that enter gluconeogenesis are glucogenic amino acids, di ba? Ito yung mga glucogenic amino acids. Ang glucogenic, kayo nang bahala mag-recall sino-sino sila. So kailangan nyo sila ulit dito. Kailangan nyo ulit ang mga ketogenic and both keto and gluco. Naalala nyo yung WIFTY dati? Yes. Ang WIFTY, both or strictly? Strictly whatever. Okay, both. Pag strictly ketogenic, ano pala tandaan pag strictly, yes, dalawa lang yung strictly LL, tama. Ang galing nyo naman. Okay? And then, kayo nang bahala mag-alam kung ano yung 13. Okay? Yung 13 sa standard amino acids. They are purely glucogenic. Okay, next. Gluconeogenesis is an anabolic pathway. Ang palatandaan nyo sa anabolic pathway as long as lumaki yung structure. Okay, lumaki yung structure. Question, bakit anabolic ang gluconeogenesis? Ano ang end product ng gluconeogenesis? That is glucose. Ilang carbons meron sa glucose? Anim, very good. Ano ang mga sources? Ano ang mga sources ng gluconeogenesis? Halimbawa, ang source niya ay glycerol. Ang glycerol, ilang carbons lang yan. Ang lactate, ilang carbons lang yan. So in short, smaller molecules sila. Okay, smaller. Na ang product ay 6 or 6 carbon, kaya ang gluconeogenesis ay anabolic pathway siya. And gluconeogenesis is also known as the Cori cycle. Okay? No need to study the specific details here. Ang gusto ko malaman nyo sa gluconeogenesis is yung mga substrates sa kailangan, and then ano yung mga enzymes, are not enzyme, hormone na nag-a-act during gluconeogenesis. Okay? Although may nasabi akong enzyme dito na isa, okay? Dun sa lesson 1 before. So overall, na-discuss na natin ang carbohydrate metabolism. So carbohydrates, done. Next, proceed naman tayo everybody sa lipid metabolism. Particularly the type of lipid na i-discuss natin dito needed for energy are the triacylglycerols. Ay, mga triacylglycerols. Na-discuss ba natin ang structure ng tags dati? Yes, so babalikan natin dito yon. Ang tags or triacylglycerol, kaya nga tri-acyl kasi ilang fatty acids meron ang tags? Yes, 3. At meron siyang trihydric alcohol. Ano yung trihydric alcohol niya? That is glycerol. Okay? Glycerol. So in this regard, important to note here that tags are hydrolyzable. Okay? Hydrolyzable. Kaya ang first step that would occur here is ang triacylglycerol, which is a hydrolyzable lipid, will be hydrolyzed by the enzyme lipase. Okay? Lipase. And via the action of lipase, the products are 1 molecule of glycerol, 1 molecule of glycerol, and 3 molecules of fatty acids. Okay? Again, we have glycerol and then we have fatty acids. Now, remember, magkaiba ang fates, magkaiba ang kapalaran ng glycerol backbone at fatty acid derivatives ng tags. So separate natin silang i-discuss. So let's start with glycerol catabolism. So kapag na-hydrolyze ang tag, ano ang pwede mangyari sa glycerol component niya? Yun ang pag-uusapan natin. In short, sa glycerol metabolism, glycerol backbone of tag is being catabolized into dihydroxyacetone phosphate. Okay? Dihydroxyacetone phosphate or dihydroxyacetone. So glycerol backbone is converted into, nakasulat na pala, hindi ako nagbabasa, dihydroxyacetone phosphate, which could enter glycolysis. Remember that dihydroxyacetone phosphate, siya ay isang intermediate product ng glycolysis na after isomerization, nagiging glyceraldehyde phosphate siya, di ba? Nagiging glyceraldehyde triphosphate. So the point here is, glycerol can be used para maging dihydroxyacetone and eventually magamit for pyruvate synthesis through glycolysis. Okay? So the first step is phosphorylation of glycerol via glycerol kinase, forming now glycerol 3-phosphate. And then after that we have oxidation. Oxidation forming eventually dihydroxyacetone phosphate. So ito na yung sinabi ko kanina, ang dihydroxyacetone phosphate ay magagamit natin na intermediate para maging glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate siya, para maging glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate na gagamitin nga para makagawa ng pyruvate. Kaya we can also use glycerol para makapag-create ng energy. So yan po ang glycerol catabolism. Next, doon naman tayo sa fatty acid component. Fatty acid component ng tags. Particularly, the chemical reaction na pagdadaanan ng fatty acids ay beta oxidation. Again, that is beta oxidation. So ano yung dapat nating malaman about beta oxidation? Una, yung terminology muna. Terminology. Number 1 is the term beta. Although na-mention ko na ito before, Beta here represents the beta carbon. Okay? It represents the beta carbon. Pag sinabing beta carbon, katabi ng alpha carbon. At ang alpha carbon, yes, ang alpha carbon ay katabi ng carbonyl group. So let's say, tingin tayo sa PowerPoint, let's say this is the carbonyl group, C double bond O. The carbon adjacent to it is the alpha, and then Greek alphabet enters. Kaya ang next carbon is the beta carbon. Okay? So this carbon is being oxidized. Okay? This is being oxidized. So later, maiintindihan nyo bakit siya nag-undergo ng oxidation. And eventually, ang product natin, pag nag-undergo ng beta oxidation ay acetyl-CoA din. Okay? Acetyl-CoA na kailangan for electron or citric acid muna, citric acid cycle, and then eventually for ATP synthesis. Okay? For ATP synthesis. And one interesting information to note about beta oxidation, there are multiple ATP or multiple acetyl-CoA na nagagawa. Multiple acetyl-CoA units na napoproduce. So mamaya magigets nyo bakit siya multiple acetyl-CoA. Okay? So far everyone, na-introduce na natin ang beta oxidation by telling what beta carbon is and ano yung ina-expect natin products. Kung marami ba o konting acetyl-CoA. So for now, hanggang dyan muna tayo. Let's have a 5-minute health break bago tayo mag-proceed sa specific steps sa beta oxidation. Before tayo officially break ng, or mag-health break, recall muna tayo na. Okay, going back with our discussion, since we are going to discuss the fate of fatty acid once it was removed or extracted from triacylglycerol, it will undergo beta oxidation. Remember, class, that the prerequisite for beta oxidation is that ang fatty acid must become a thioester. So that is, ang fatty acid na isang carboxylic acid, dapat ay maging thioester. So recall when we say thioester, ester siya pero sulfur ang nakalagay instead of oxygen. Okay? And this is held by coenzyme A, addition of coenzyme A. So that is, for instance, we have the fatty acid stearic acid here, a stearic acid. So through the addition of coenzyme A, so ito yung coenzyme A, and via the aid of the enzyme acyl-CoA synthetase, we have now a thioester here, a thioester, which is an acyl coenzyme A. Okay? So makikita natin na hindi na carboxylic acid ang structure ng stearic acid, but instead, it became a thioester. Okay? Thioester na siya. So that is SR. Okay? SR na yung makikita natin. So this is a prerequisite para mangyari ang apat na chemical reactions or steps under beta oxidation. So first step, dito na tayo sa bawat step sa beta oxidation. The first step is oxidation. Okay? First step is oxidation, and that is oxidation of acyl-CoA, and that is being facilitated by the enzyme acyl-CoA dehydrogenase, and also it requires the presence of an oxidizing agent FAD. Okay? It requires the presence of the oxidizing agent FAD. And through oxidation between the alpha and beta carbons, okay, because of oxidation between alpha and beta carbons, meron tayong na-generate na isang FADH2, isang reduced equivalent na FADH2. And as you can see, between the alpha and beta carbon, there was a double bond. Okay, there was a double bond formed because of oxidation. So in short, sa step 1, nag-form ng double bond between alpha and beta carbons and may generation of reduced equivalent FADH2. Next, so step 2 naman is hydration. Hydration tells us that there is addition of water to both alpha and beta carbons. That's why makikita natin na mayroong nadagdag na water dito, and you can tell that the double bond was broken already. Okay? Nasira siya. And you can see na ang beta carbon, it became a beta alcohol. So pag sinabi nating beta alcohol, merong attached OH group, merong attached OH group sa beta carbon. So recap tayo, sa step 1 we have oxidation. And sa second step, we have hydration. Remember, sa step 1, meron tayong racket kasi meron na generate na cheque na FADH2. What about on step number 3? Sa step number 3 naman, there is also oxidation. But in this case, the one that we need is already NAD. Okay? NAD na ang makikreate. So ang oxidation, this happens at the beta alcohol. Okay, so it happens sa beta alcohol. So makikita natin dito na yung beta alcohol nagkaroon ng burahin natin Ayan, ulitin ko lang. So sa step number 3, yes, there is oxidation via the aid of the oxidizing agent NAD. And as you can see, on the beta alcohol, instead of OH, there was formation of C double bond O. Okay, so there was formation of C double bond O. So makikita natin sa step number 3, meron na naman tayong side racket. Side racket that was generation of another reduced equivalent which will enter the electron transport chain. And then finally on step number 4, there is cleavage. When we say cleavage, that means the bond between the alpha, and the beta carbon is being cut. Okay? It is being cleaved off, natatanggal. Okay? So makakat siya between the alpha and beta carbon. And after cutting, after cleavage, makikita natin na yung naputol, okay, tingin kayo sa PowerPoint class, ang naputol, this one, yung naka-encircle, this is already acetyl-CoA. Okay, this is already the structure of acetyl-CoA. And this acetyl-CoA will now enter the citric acid cycle, and then the process will proceed until makapag-create ng ATP. Okay? Until makapag-create ng ATP. So kaya siya beta oxidation kasi may oxidation sa beta carbon para makat yung dalawang carbon portions making up one acetyl-CoA. Okay? Making up one acetyl-CoA. So what happens next? Are you still listening, class? Charge ko lang yung yung tablet. So ano yung important note to remember here? Wait lang, saksa ko lang. Ayan. So ano yung important thing to remember? Since na-cut ang dalawang carbons between the alpha and beta carbons, ang makikita natin is nabawasan ang number of carbons nung stearic acid. Remember, ang stearic acid has 18 carbons. Okay, 18 carbons. At ang bawat isang acetyl-CoA may dalawang carbons. Okay, may dalawang carbons. So through beta oxidation, the 18-carbon stearic acid through beta oxidation has been cut. Nabawasan ng dalawang carbons at naging acetyl-CoA yun. And then yung 16 carbons, babalik na naman siya sa initial step na madadagdagan ng coenzyme A para maging thioester. And then pag naging thioester, mag-undergo ulit ng oxidation, nagigets nyo ba? Mag-undergo ng hydration, mag-undergo ng oxidation, mag-undergo ng cleavage. Hanggang ang 16 carbons, maging 14 na lang. Kaya kinakat siya per 2 carbons. Kaya sa beta oxidation, matatandaan na marami tayong acetyl-CoA na nagagawa. Okay? Kasi sa long chain, kinakat-cut siya at maraming acetyl-CoA ang makikreate. And finally, ATP, marami rin tayo makikreate. So yan ang tatandaan natin about beta oxidation. Okay? So recap tayo. The result is a new acyl-CoA having 2 fewer carbons. 2 fewer because of cleavage that occur, okay, between the alpha and beta carbon, naputol between alpha and beta carbon. This new acyl-CoA can then proceed through beta oxidation again, cleaving off two more carbons until finally yung natitira na lang siyang acetyl-CoA that would be utilized for ATP synthesis. So for example, yung sinabi ko kanina, halimbawa meron tayong 18 carbon fatty acid, 18 carbon. So sa first round ng beta oxidation, nakabuo tayo ng isang acetyl-CoA. Kaya magiging 16 na lang siya. Until the time comes na maging 2 carbons na lang siya that would readily be converted into acetyl-CoA. Okay? Kaya kinakat-cut siya. That's why, kung meron tayong 18 acetyl-CoA, we expect that there are how many acetyl-CoA? We have 9. Okay, we have 9. Very good. Meron tayong 9 acetyl-CoA. Question, isa pang question dito. Kung meron tayong 18 carbon acetyl-CoA or 18 carbon fatty acid rather, at meron tayong 9 acetyl-CoA, ilang rounds bago makabuo ng 9 acetyl-CoA? Ilang beses magkakat? Ilang rounds ang beta oxidation? Very good, 8. Okay? 8. O bakit 8? Kasi yung pang-siyam, wala ka nang ikakat kasi dalawa na lang natira. Okay? Dalawa na lang natira. Nagets ba? Okay. So a total of 8 cycles, nakasulat na rin pala, a total of 8 cycles of beta oxidation are needed to cleave the 8 CC bonds, carbon-to-carbon bonds, such that every carbon of the original fatty acid ends up in an acetyl-CoA. So to summarize what I said, ito yung ibig sabihin nun. Halimbawa, we have here the structure of stearic acid having 18 carbons, okay, 18 carbons. At the first round, ito yon, first round, okay? And then second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh, eighth, okay, 8. And then, tama, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, isa pa pala, 8. Ayan. So makikita natin na at the end of the 8th round of beta oxidation, wala na tayo mabibeta oxidation dito kasi dalawang carbons na lang sila. Okay? Kaya pag tinanong kayo kung ilang cycles sa 18 carbon fatty acid, 8. Okay? Pero kapag ilang acetyl-CoA ang na-produce, ilan? Siyam. Okay, siyam. So in short, pag cycle, -1. Okay, -1. Divided by 2, -1. Kasi the last round is, yun na lang yung natitira. Yan na yung buong acetyl-CoA. Question, sir, paano pag odd number? Hindi mangyayari yung odd. Anong sabi ko before sa fatty acids? Naturally occurring fatty acids are? Yes, even numbered sila. Okay? Kaya match lang siya. So ngayon, i-summarize natin yung mga nag-gain natin, nag-generate natin. So complete beta oxidation of stearic acid, for example, having 18 carbons forms the following. Number 1, 9 acetyl-CoA molecules. Okay, 9 acetyl-CoA. Question, bakit 8 NADH? Kasi ilang beses ang beta oxidation na nangyari? 8. Okay, 8. Question, nangyayari ba ang NADH generation sa isang step sa beta oxidation? Yes. Anong step yon? Step 1 o step 3? Okay, very good. Sa third step. Okay, sa third step. And then, may FADH2 bang nakikreate? May FADH2 ba? Yes. Ilan? Siyam o 8? 8 din. Kasi sa first step ito, okay, sa first step, may oxidation din tayo ng beta carbon, okay, ng beta carbon. So that is, or these are the products of fatty acid catabolism through beta oxidation. So anong realization natin altogether? Makikita natin dito na ang daming ATP na magagawa sa fatty acid metabolism. Kaya nga, ang fatty acid in the form of tags, siya ay reserba natin ng enerhiya pag tayo ay wala ng makain. Kaya totoo yung kasabihan na yung mga payat, sila unang mamamatay. Okay? Pag nag-famine, pag nag-famine. At ang huling mamamatay mga matataba. Totoo yun. Kasi meron tayong extra fats or tags na nakastore sa adipocytes na magagamit kapag kinailangan na talaga. So that is, eto, beta oxidation. So imaginein mo pa nagda-diet ka at mataba ka, nagda-diet ka, beta oxidation, please, gawin mo na to, please. O ganun na, okay? Beta oxidation tawag doon. Cut, cut, cut. So ngayon, proceed tayo sa computation ng ATP sa beta oxidation. Okay? So, para ma-remind tayo sa proper calculation ng tag, ito yung common mistake ng mga students. Meron tayong na-utilize na ATP. Okay, meron tayong na-utilize na ATP kapag tayo ay magkakatabolize ng fatty acid. So for example, stearic acid ulit, we have 18 carbon fatty acid, stearic acid. So step 1, converting the fatty acid into thioester. Naalala niyo yung thioester? Prerequisite ba to? Yes. So para maging thioester siya, kailangan nating mag-expend ng ATP. Okay? Kailangan natin mag-expend ng ATP. So gagastos tayo dito. Investment to little investment. Kaya please remember na pag nag-compute kayo ng total ATP sa beta oxidation, -2. Okay? -2. Lagi nyo ma-minusan ng 2. So halimbawa, ang sagot nyo, halimbawa lang 148. Halimbawa, nung kinompute nyo lahat, 148. So dapat, pag tinanong kayo sa final answer, 146 lang. Kasi gumastos nung una. And then, next, add up the ATP from the reduced coenzymes made during beta oxidation. Halimbawa, meron tayong 18 carbons for stearic acid. Since 8 cycles lang, 8 lang ang gagawin nyong factor. So 8 times 2.5 and then 8 times 1.5. So total of 32 if I'm not mistaken. Okay, 32. And then, syempre, meron tayong siyam acetyl-CoA. Kung meron tayong 9 acetyl-CoA, i-multiply yun sa 10. Gets na bakit 10 ang factor? Okay, total of 90. Okay, total of 90. So if you are going to add this, okay, 90 plus 32, okay, 90 plus 32, we have 2, 12. Tama ba ako? 12. Tama ba ako sa add? Okay, 12. And then, mamaminusan ba natin to ng 2? Yes. Kaya ang net ATP ilan? 120. Ang laki ng difference compared sa glucose. Okay? So ang total net ATP dito ay 100, ayan, nakasulat, 120. O wag niyong kakalimutan ang -2, -2. So in short, sa carbs at sa lipids, merong ininvest na dalawang ATP. Naintindihan? Okay. So pwede nating i-expect sa exam, for instance, na may mga question stating a certain fatty acid. A fatty acid, blah, 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 ganyan, ganyan, ganyan. First question, how many rounds? How many ganyan? How many total ATP? So ito yon, beta oxidation. Okay? So practicein nyo yung pag-compute niyan. Although it's quite easy naman siya. Next, continue natin. Since natapos na natin everyone ang glycerol catabolism and then fatty acid metabolism, meron pa tayong dapat malaman about fatty acid metabolism, especially during excess production. Usually when we have, if we do not have enough carbohydrates, of course, triacylglycerols are being catabolized. And remember, iba ang nagiging fate ng glycerol at iba ang nagiging fate ng fatty acid components. Okay? Iba ang nagiging fate nila. And one of the possible outcomes, aside from acetyl-CoA formation, nagiging ketone bodies sila. And examples of these ketone bodies are, number 1, we have acetoacetate. Aside from that, beta-hydroxybutyrate. And then lastly, we have acetone. Ang ketone bodies, especially when excess, could result to acidotic tendencies. So pag sinabi nating acidotic tendencies, yung mga acidosis, and this could be fatal. So ketone bodies are small molecules which are readily soluble in blood and in urine. And kapag meron tayong, if there is a chance or tendency na may accumulation or building up of ketone bodies, that could result to ketosis, and this could be fatal to the patient. Okay? Kaya ang mga tao na may excessive na nagsastarve, one of the causes, possible causes of death is ketoacidosis. Okay? Pwede magkaroon ng ketoacidosis because of too much ketone body formation. Okay, so we are done with this. So overall, we are finished with lipid metabolism. So brief review about lipid metabolism. Tandaan nyo, iba ang fate ng glycerol at ng fatty acid. Pag glycerol, dihydroxyacetone. Okay, dihydroxyacetone phosphate na gagamitin for glycolysis eventually. Okay? And in some cases, gluconeogenesis. And then fatty acid, we have beta oxidation. Ay, beta oxidation. Dalawa ang major events sa dapat mangyari. Number one is yung thioester formation ng fatty acid at yung pangalawa yung apat na reactions. Okay, yung apat na reactions sa thioester. So sa apat na reactions, dalawa doon ay oxidation. Kaya sa isang round, meron tayo nabubuong isang NADH at isang FADH2. Okay, so yan po ang beta oxidation. So lastly, we have amino acid metabolism. So ang catabolism of amino acid has something to do with its chemical structure. So balikan natin ang structure ng amino acid. Important component ng amino acid structure is the amino group. Okay, is the amino group. So this amino group has to be removed. Okay, this has to be removed. Kasi this could be fatal if accumulated. Okay? This could be fatal if accumulated. That's why ang goal is ma-remove siya. So paano yon nangyayari? Okay? How does it happen? Sulat muna natin bago ko i-discuss. So for example, we have here the amino acid. So to facilitate ultimate removal of the amino group from the amino acid, this amino acid in general has to react with an alpha keto acid. Okay, this has to react with the so-called alpha keto acid. Now, anong klaseng reaction ang mangyayari sa kanila? Ang tawag doon ay transamination. Okay, transamination. So the chemical reaction is called transamination. So pag sinabi natin class na transamination, trans means to move, okay? Or ilipat, i-transfer, that's right. So that tells us na in transamination, the amino group, okay? The amino group from the amino acid will be transferred to the alpha keto acid. Okay, this will be transferred to the alpha keto acid. So mapupunta sa alpha keto acid ang amino group ni amino acid, and ang papalit sa amino acid that comes from the alpha keto acid is the C double bond O. Okay, C double bond O group. Okay, that is the carbonyl group. So ang papalit ay carbonyl group. Now, ano yung common? Again, ano yung usual alpha keto acid that reacts with amino acid in general? So the common is the alpha keto glutarate. Okay, that is alpha keto glutarate. And that is alpha keto glutarate. So, through transamination, I repeat, through transamination, ano ang magiging products? Okay, ano yung magiging products? Number one, ito ay connected kay amino acid. Yung unang product ay isang alpha keto acid. Parang nagkapalit sila. Okay, parang nagkapalit. So una, ulitin ko, ang magiging product through transamination, yung amino acid naging alpha keto acid. And then pangalawa, yung alpha keto acid naging amino acid. Okay? Naging amino acid. And usually, ang amino acid na nake-create dito is glutamate. Okay? That is glutamate. So later magigets nyo siya pag nagpakita tayo ng figure. Okay? Pag nagpakita tayo ng figure. Basta tandaan nyo sa transamination, nagkapalit sila. Okay, nagkapalit. Ang amino group ni amino acid napunta kay alpha keto acid at yung carbonyl group ni alpha keto acid napunta kay amino acid. Okay? Kaya ang products are, number one, alpha keto acid, and then number two, amino acid na glutamate. Okay, na glutamate. Next, continue natin. Next, sir, saan connected ang removal ng amino group? O, tingin kayo sa PowerPoint, Between these two products, question, between these two products, na kanino na ang amino group? Kay glutamate or kay keto acid? Na kanino na ang amino group? Na kanino na ang amino group? Sa product, product tayo, ito tayo, product. Na kanino na ang amino group? Napunta kay glutamate. Na kay glutamate na. Di ba nga nilipat? Okay, nilipat. Ulitin ko ha, si amino acid, yung amino group niya lumipat dito. Okay, lumipat. Okay? And then, gets ko na yung sagot nyo. Gets ko na yung sagot nyo. Pero ang sagot dito is nasa glutamate na ang amino group. Okay? Nasa glutamate na. And then, ang amino group from the glutamate will enter urea cycle. Okay? This will enter urea cycle. Okay? This will enter urea cycle. And finally, mare-remove ang amino group in the form of urea. Okay, this will be removed in the form of urea. Okay, so ang amino group ay nasa alpha keto acid na in the form of glutamate. Yun yung exact answer, okay? So nasa alpha keto acid na siya in the form of glutamate. So yun yung usual form ng amino acid when it received the amino group from the original amino acid. Okay? So halimbawa, this one, ito yung sinasabi ko na transamination reaction. Halimbawa, class, ito yung amino acid. Okay? Ito yung amino acid. And then the goal is for the amino group from the original amino acid to be removed eventually. So para ma-remove ito, kailangan ilipat muna siya sa kapartner na alpha keto acid. At kapalit nito is the carbonyl group mapupunta naman sa original amino acid. So nagpalit sila. Kaya ang product through transamination is yung amino acid naging alpha keto acid. Okay? And then yung alpha keto acid sa reactant naging glutamate. Okay? Usually nagiging glutamate siya in general. Okay? So in general, ito ay glutamate. So kay glutamate naman gagaling yung amino group na papasok sa urea cycle. And then, mare-remove na siya finally. Okay? So ito yung sinabi ko kanina, transamination often uses alpha ketoglutarate as the alpha keto acid. So this is the structure of alpha ketoglutarate. And through transaminase enzyme, again transaminase, yung alpha ketoglutarate naging glutamate siya. Okay, naging glutamate. So ito yung nangyari kay alpha ketoglutarate, naging glutamate siya. Okay? While alanine, which is a sample amino acid, it became an alpha keto acid that is pyruvate. Okay, naging pyruvate siya. So yung pyruvate is the carbon skeleton already. Okay, this is the carbon skeleton. And carbon skeleton has its own fate. Okay? It has its own fate. Meaning, iba yung kanyang pinagdadaanan na pathway para maging energy siya eventually. But I bet meron na kayong idea dito. The mere fact that we mentioned na nagiging pyruvate ang alanine, for example, alam niyo na ma-oxidize siya eventually, provided na oxygen-rich, into acetyl-CoA at magagamit into energy. Okay? At magagamit into energy. So that is the fate of amino acid. Particularly, yung amino group, it must be removed. Okay? It must be removed. Now, yung carbon skeleton, depende sa product. Okay? Depende sa product na nagagawa. So, nakalagay dito, etong slide na to, na-discuss ko na to lahat. Okay? Ayan o, amino group will enter the urea cycle and then may excrete through urine. Okay? In the urine. And then, ang carbon skeleton naman, meron tayong tatlong possible fates sa carbon skeleton. Pag sinabi natin carbon skeleton, ito yung amino acid na devoid, okay, na devoid of amino group. Okay, devoid of amino group. Nagets ba yung ibig sabihin ng devoid? Pag sinabing devoid, na-remove na yung amino group. Okay, na-remove na. Now, may tatlong possible fates. Number one, ang carbon skeleton could be pyruvate, could become pyruvate. And pyruvate will be a source of energy as well. And pwede siya maging acetyl-CoA diretso. Pwede siya maging acetyl-CoA diretso, or it can enter through any intermediate sa citric acid cycle. bottom line nito, everyone, kapag ganito ang fate ng carbon skeleton, pwede sila maging source ng energy. Okay? Pwede sila maging source ng energy. Although it varies, depende kung sila ay glucogenic or ketogenic, okay? Glucogenic or ketogenic. So this figure summarizes the list of amino acids that can enter the citric acid cycle and other possible fates. So for example, for alanine, cysteine, and other related amino acids, ito yung may carbon skeleton na nagiging pyruvate. Nagiging pyruvate sila. So pag naging pyruvate, alam nyo na ang susunod na mangyayari based on our previous discussion. And for other amino acids like isoleucine, leucine, and other related amino acids, makikita natin na nagiging acetyl-CoA sila. Kaya nagiging acetyl-CoA. So everyone, observe nyo ang leucine at lysine. O, tignan nyo yung leucine at lysine. Ano yung pagkakatandaan nyo kay leucine tsaka kay lysine? Ano siya? Strictly? Yes, strictly ketogenic. So strictly ketogenic ang leucine at lysine. Why? Ang ibig sabihin natin ng ketogenic, they are converted into acetyl-CoA. Okay? They are being converted to acetyl-CoA. And eventually, ketone bodies. Kaya strictly ketogenic lang sila. Yes. Kaya pansin nyo sa ibang mga boxes, walang leucine at lysine dyan. Okay? Sila ay meant lang para maging acetyl-CoA. What about sa nagiging pyruvate? Ang pyruvate ay glucogenic kasi pwede siyang bumalik into glucose, okay, through gluconeogenesis. Okay, through gluconeogenesis. And then may iba naman, both keto and glucogenic. Yun na yung mga ibang amino acids. That's why meron tayong classifications ng amino acids based on metabolic fate. So we have glucogenic amino acids. These are catabolized to pyruvate o kaya they can be an intermediate to citric acid cycle. Next, we also have ketogenic amino acids. Nabanggit natin, they are converted into acetyl-CoA and other related compounds to acetyl-CoA. Okay? And they can be used as precursors for ketone body formation. So the point here is, ang mga amino acids, pagkaalis ng amino group nila, yung carbon skeleton, pwedeng maging pyruvate, pwedeng maging acetyl-CoA, pwedeng maging intermediate na kailangan sa citric acid cycle. Okay? Sa citric acid cycle. Okay? So yan ang amino acid metabolism. So bago natin i-end formally ang discussion sa last lesson, recap tayo ng amino acid metabolism. O wag kayong malilito ha, wag kayong malilito. Sa amino acid, ang goal, alisin ang amino group sa mismong amino acid. Okay? Para maalis yon, ang unang gagawin ay transamination. Transamination, ibig sabihin, yung amino group ng amino acid na pinag-uusapan, halimbawa dito, alanine, ililipat sa keto acid. Ililipat sa kapartner na keto acid. And that is ketoglutarate. Now, pag sinabing lilipat, ang kapalitan niya ay yung carbonyl group. Yung carbonyl group. Kaya ang product, pag nag-exchange sila, ang nagiging keto acid ay yung natira, yung remnants ng alanine. Okay? Halimbawa, pyruvate ang na-form. Kaya siya carbon skeleton kasi ito yung part ng amino acid na natanggal yung amino group. Okay, natanggal. Sa napunta yung amino group, nalipat sa original keto acid. So pag naging amino group to, nagiging glutamic acid siya. Pag ketoglutarate ang pinag-usapan, automatic glutamate yung resulta. Okay, glutamate. And this glutamate will serve as precursor para makagawa ng urea. Urea kasi galing sa amino group. Pag pumasok ang amino group through the urea cycle, ready na siyang itapon. So naalis mo na yung amino group. Question, may natira ba sa amino acid? Yes, yung carbon skeleton yon. The carbon skeleton or the remnants of the amino acid could become pyruvate, like in the case of alanine kanina. Halimbawa kay leucine at kay lysine, pwedeng acetyl-CoA. o kaya other amino acids pwede maging intermediate sa citric acid cycle. Kaya nakalagay dyan yung mga iba't ibang amino acids na pwede maging certain products after protein or amino acid metabolism. So tanggalin ang amino. Pagkatanggal ng amino, yung carbon skeleton pwede maging any of this depending on the amino acid that we are referring. Okay? So, overall class, natapos natin ang carbohydrate, lipid, and also protein metabolism. Okay? Natapos natin ang carbohydrate, lipid, and protein metabolism. So, overall, that ends our discussion.